And welcome back to the WCHE Morning Show. I'm Eric Lambera. Co-host today is Barry D. Joining us in the studio to discuss some of the environmental impacts of the East Whiteland Data Center project. We have Julie Ferris. Julie is a concerned citizen involved in the fight against the proposed data center. Julie, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Of course, great to have you here on the air. And so to start, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and secondly, in your involvement in the proposed East Whiteland Data Center project?
Sure. Well, I've lived in Chester County for about 8 years now. We moved here in 2018 and bought a house in Charlestown. So I, have been around the area, really fell in love with it, originally from Delco. So very different environment.
How you doing?
I know, right? I like to say we're the best kind of Philadelphia. We have quite a bit of feistiness to us, right? And so keeping with that theme, I ended up working in healthcare research and doing a lot of work in data and statistics. And so when I saw the data center, come to pass in the township, I had a lot of concern. So I actually don't even live in East Whiteland. I'm like into the adjacent property, the adjacent township. But what my big concern was is that we're on well water. And so, that has a lot of impact from a consumption standpoint. And then there was that little moment where I found that it was being built on a Superfund site. And I started to look into the Superfund site, myself and other people as well. So, I'm not just a solo act here. There's a great group of us that are focusing on it. And as we dug deeper, we found a lot of disturbing things. And so I love the movie The Big Short, where there's that one great little line that Ryan Gosling talks about, just being like, a group of people decided to do what no one else did, which was to go look at the information.
Love that movie.
And so that's exactly what happened here is that, taking it directly from that, we started to go look and seeing things did not add up and there was a lot of concern. So.
Well, I think the fact that you don't live in East Whiteland just goes to show the impact it's going to have on the entire county as a whole.
Yeah, and I think in general it's going to be a really interesting, landscape for the next, few years if these things evolve, because even though they're making these, local township decisions, they definitely have residual impact across multiple townships. And
right.
So, it's one of those things where, you're going to a township meeting that's not your township, but you care because your electric rates are going up. Like, the concerns that you have over water and consumption all impact you. So it's kind of a weird dynamic that's unfolding right now. But, very important to stay involved and show up.
It's interesting. There are townships, and I won't say they are around here. I've seen it before, though, because I've been involved in township politics for, 25, 30 years. But what they'll start to do is say, you can't make a comment because you're not a resident here. Now, you may be a taxpayer. You may own a building there, and then people go, well, you're not a resident here, so you can't talk. Well, no, I'm still invested in the community. And even so, and because you do get disruptors that come from other places that can cause problems. But the fact is, when you're talking about something as important as that, you still need to allow people to speak because you go, well, I'm in a neighboring community and I don't like what you're doing because you're dumping it all on us. But there are supervisors out there that will say, no, you're not allowed to talk.
Yeah, and it's really important to kind of know some of the local code. And I, kind of laugh a bit about it because, look, none of this stuff is sexy. It's not fun to go look up what the municipal planning code is, what's the, the local township laws and what they're doing. None of that is, something that's attractive and fun per se, but it's really important to know your rights in the situation because you do have the right to speak and there is, public comment. So, many times I spoke at the end of meetings because I'm not a citizen, so I made sure okay, everyone in East Whiteland went, and, there's a group of us that go and speak that care, because you see the bigger impact that's, about to, happen.
Sure. And now, as you mentioned, you've been at some of the meetings, you've looked a lot into this project. As you've started looking into this project, what did you find that raised some red flags and concerns?
Yeah, so the biggest one, without question, was understanding the kind of status of the Superfund site. And so I'm not sure if people are familiar with Superfund sites, but, essentially there are quite a few areas in the U.S. where there is contamination from, former commercial or industrial, projects or companies that were there. And so this company was the Foot Mineral Mine, and the Foot Mineral Company, and they were mining lithium from the ground. And so that was, there's 79 acres that this property, encompasses, and that was there, and they were, doing the commercial and industrial activities on the site. And so it's contaminated with, over 20 different contaminants, and it ranges from arsenic to hexavalent chromium, which is, the Aaron Brockovich chemical, and it's in the groundwater and surface water, as well as in the soil. And so that even has the capability of going into the air as you go and create dust. And so that was one of the biggest, components that I saw was, okay, the site is extremely contaminated, definitely should be on the Superfund list, and needs a lot of work. And the other thing was the fact that it's not remediated. It is in the most recent report coming out of the EPA, which is they do these every 5 years they do an annual review, and so they go and the third 5-year annual review. It was pretty much a disaster. They go, and this is the EPA. So again, while I work in statistics, this is not my own research. This is, the government, federal government, EPA that's managing the site. And they basically deferred the protectiveness. They said they couldn't go ahead and determine if the site was safe for human health and, if everything was working. They found, all these types of hazards, said it was not safe for people to be on the site, was not safe for children to be on the site. And this is, very important because the site is actually located directly next to Malvern Hunt, which is a residential community. Then there's a child care facility directly adjacent to it. There's the church farm school that's on the other end. So it's just kind of surrounded by children and people. So, very concerning to see that they're not sure if it's protective of human health and the environment. The contamination levels in the groundwater were 550 times the acceptable levels and the goals of what they were trying to achieve for remediation. There's VOCs coming out of the soil, and they even have concerns of vapor intrusion that's going ahead and occurring on the site. So it's by all means pretty much a mess, and it's not getting better. It's getting worse. And so, that was one of the biggest and most alarming findings that, I uncovered as well as others. And then the other, part to that that's very important is that how this was represented back to the township by, multiple entities was that the site was remediated, which is not correct. And so, it was definitely a misrepresentation and an inaccurate statement to make. So, and that occurred on legal attestations, on legal documents, throughout the process to go ahead and in an attempt to build the data center. And so that was something where, again, red flags need to be raised because, the site is not okay and building on it is going to compound the issue in a major way.
I've been here all my life, and you could have just called me. A lot of the local people knew what it was. I was fascinated when Malvern Hunt was built because I was like, that's like huge. The lithium, they just dumped their stuff. That was when they were finished. They just dumped it there. It just was a hole in the ground. They just dumped all their stuff there back in the day when you could do that. And I was amazed when they started building Malvern Hunt because I'm like, that has got to be contaminating all the water in the area. And I actually know somebody, Debbie Abel, who lives down the road, and when she bought her place, when they had the water tested, it was fine because you need very specialized tests to find the contaminants that are coming out of that mess. Right, so it was a real problem for them, but they allowed that to happen. They have said that the whole thing was basically stabilized in place, and it's really not happened at all.
No,
and I've said it before. The best thing they could do is pave over the whole thing just to keep water from getting to it. At this point, but that's what they do in a lot of cases because once you start cutting that ground, stuff's flying everywhere. Now you got your dust everywhere, and it's infiltrated through all of it. It's permeated through that whole thing. I mean, it's bad. And now Toll Brothers has the 100 acres next to it, and they're going to build an over 55 community right next to Malvern Hunt, right across the street from it.
Yeah.
Craziness.
It is crazy. I mean, so they already established. So, the Superfund process and to try to attempt to remediate a site, it is complex, but there's very distinct, components of it. And so when they went and started to do the due diligence about like what was going on the site, they actually even found like 6 distinct areas of radiation. And so there's a historical society as well that has actually connected the site back to the Manhattan Project. So it was attributed to creating the zirconium that was used.
Yes.
And so
they did. They worked with zirconium. Yeah.
They did. And so, and like the craziest part of this is right now, one of the plans, for this data center is directly over one of the worst contaminated wells on the site. That's, at 550x the acceptable levels. It used to be the former solvent burn pit area. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to build on top of that. And you're going, no, this is massively problematic. And to your point, anyone who's done any construction project knows dust is a huge factor. Mm-hmm. And so there's the groundwater contamination, which you pointed out and already mentioned. And again, that's documented. There's a plume of contaminated water that runs for 2 miles that was documented long ago. And then, but this component with the dust, a bunch of the contaminants and toxins that are in the soils, they get released and they become inhalants, and they are extremely hazardous and toxic to people. And so the community is at major risk, and it's really quite alarming.
Now, as far as some of the concerns, you've mentioned quite a lot of concerns. Have you guys shared these with officials or the EPA, and what kind of response have you received so far?
Yeah, so we have, definitely contacted the EPA, the PADEP, and the Township Board of Supervisors. And to be perfectly honest and transparent, the lack of support is very, very alarming. So, we are not just people screaming and complaining about a data center. Like, we're coming with tangible evidence and facts to go ahead and speak to them to say, look, these levels, like shown here in the EPA report, that have, these extreme levels of contamination, the site is getting worse, not better. It's not going the right direction, guys. It's going the wrong direction. The misrepresentations and false statements that were made on these legal attestations, all of that has been communicated to the EPA, to the PADEP, and to the township, and we're seeing no action. In fact, without the proper permits, the developer started building on the site and dust started kicking into the air. So, one of the reasons I'm here is really getting the community aware of the urgency that's around this, because they, without the permits, started moving and kicking up the dust and soil. And so, we had to immediately call the township, calling the EPA. And so, we have the report from the EPA that's from 2024 that documents, all the contamination is very clear. But there doesn't seem to be any sort of scientific based or even logical answers supporting the community and addressing the concern. So on July 2nd, the township actually had to tell the developer to stop work, stop earth disturbances, per the EPA, because there's the risk and hazard to the community, is too high. And that's the extent of support that we have. And last week alone, they tried to, quite frankly, sneak through an amendment at a meeting where the developer, has a plan that's approved that required digging into the soil 20 feet to build a basement.
Right.
That they wanted to change that plan, and so they, submitted an amendment earlier this year, then withdrew that plan because of public opposition. Now they're trying to put through parts of the plan. And so last week we see 24 hours before the July, meeting for the Board of Supervisors, something they're trying to call the field change. And the field change is changing the entire cooling mechanism of the data center and site. And that's not a small field change. A field change is supposed to be something that's minor, like, we ran into a rock and we had to move a pipe, right? Like, this is changing everything.
We have to shift the building 2 feet to the left.
Exactly, right? So this is something that's absolutely major, because they're, no longer trying to dig into the ground. They're putting air chillers on the roof. That is by no means a minor change, but that just happened. And so, we all had to scramble and get together and go to the meeting and, and vocalize our opposition and concern. And we actually even had one board member, Peter Fixler, still supported it. So, the institutions that are really supposed to be protecting the people have just been, quite frankly, massively disappointing. And the group of us that are involved, we're going to continue to go and push to make sure that we can protect our homes and our families and the community.
The mantra I can tell you about the PADEP is that they are pretty much a toothless lion in a lot of ways. And I can tell you, to one friend of mine who's had serious problems with issues with the adjoining farm to his farm, with burning and contamination and burning vinyl siding, tires, things like that, the water is running into the Brandywine. The DEP has deferred back to the township, and they say, we don't really handle that. What we do is we allow the township to do enforcement. See where you're going with that?
Yeah.
Now, the township just goes laissez-faire on it, and it becomes a problem. And unless you knuckle down on them, if you think you're going to a higher level, they will tell you, oh, no, we defer back to local government because that's better.
And we've heard that, so it's really funny that that's been your experience as well. And But we actually heard that from the EPA, where they went ahead and tried to claim that, like, oh, they're just advisory. And I'm like, wait, I'm researching here, I'm learning, but there's something called CERCLA, which is what is managing the Superfund sites essentially, and they have an enforcement arm, and they have a lot of taxpayer-funded ability to shut down the sites. And so, they are not just an advisory arm, but they're trying to claim that.
If they're an advisory arm, how come they write so many fines?
Exactly. So
you can't just be advisory if you're penalizing also. You can't be one and not the other when you're doing those things.
Exactly. So, we're really not seeing a lot of support, and it's honestly contributing to the frustration because we very much feel like we're on our own battling. But, we've been a capable bunch, and we've worked together. It's a group of, different types of, ordinary people going and doing the research and looking into things, and then, continuing to challenge and ask questions. And, for me in particular, I've been very big on saying provide the scientific basis, right? So for this one, well that they keep mentioning, they're moving that well. They're trying to move that well. And so I asked the EPA, go ahead and provide because they want to build a data center building directly on top of that. Now, why you would want to build, a building where there's stuff coming out of the soil and has, a lot of concerns with it.
This is an observation survey well, is what it is, right?
Yes, it's a survey monitoring well. But, so I, asked the EPA to go and provide the scientific basis of how they're going to go and maintain the continuity of the data that they've collected for the past, 30 years versus, on an ongoing basis. And there's no response. They just go silent. And so that's where you're just, something's wrong if they can't even formulate a response.
But they can't get caught in a lie if they don't respond.
Correct.
You'll notice that's what they do. They just disappear, right? That's the answer.
I just keep thinking of, Homer Simpson when he just disappears into the green bush.
Right.
That
right.
That's what I'm thinking now.
That's exactly what
they're doing. They're like, look, we can't say anything, so we're just going to slowly back away.
Yep. And they hope you'll go away.
Exactly. But the one thing, I also want to make clear why I'm here is we're not going away. We are definitely a group of people that continue to mobilize and continue to expand. And we're going to be ramping up. This should be a national news story, right? This is kind of crazy where, data centers in general, we're learning a lot about the environmental impact, the health impact, and to see it compounded with an unremediated, Superfund site. It's honestly bonkers. So, there should be national coverage of this without question. And I, think it will absolutely get to that scale. It's, a lot of the concerns that we continue to have, is just revolved around ordinary people. Like we saw, on the site last week, people installing a fence. The workers had no protective equipment on. So, obviously we contacted OSHA, no response from OSHA. But, there are people already on site as I mentioned, they were trying to do the work and they don't even have the proper protective equipment. Do they know that they're working on the site that has arsenic and all different, types of inhalants and toxins coming out of the soil? I don't think they do. And so, that's something we want to make sure that we convey and get across to the community, to protect even the PICO workers. One of the entities that we saw documented, PICO, as they submitted paperwork to the Public Utilities Company, they went ahead and told them that there were no environmental matters regarding the site. It's a federally listed Superfund site. The information's publicly available online. You could have just Googled it, and you can see that this is an unremediated site. It's still on the national priorities list. It's been there since 1992, hasn't gone away. And yet, they, in their documents and paperwork, they said that there was no environmental matters related to the site.
So you've mentioned some of the false statements as well as the contamination. Has any of this been before a judge?
So we are working on that component. So we've had a procedural case that went before a judge, and so that was trying to go an angle, approaching and looking at some of the procedural components for the applications and submissions. The environmental component has not made it in front of the judge yet, but it is something that we absolutely intend to pursue because it's very clear and very evident that things are not okay. And PA is a great state in the sense where we actually have a lot of people don't know this, but I'm sure the two of you do, but we actually have a constitutional right as a PA resident to clean air and water. It's something that's granted in our state constitution. So we have a large and strong legal standing to say that, this is not safe for our communities and this is against our constitutional rights as, Pennsylvania residents.
It's actually interesting because Pennsylvania Constitution is very aggressive in that. They're also very aggressive in your gun rights.
Yeah, they are.
Two things. They want you to have fresh air, fresh water, and it's stronger than the federal Constitution on your gun rights. It's an actual remarkable document. It
really is. It's something to continue to educate yourself on and look at because we do things a little bit different. But, with fracking and some of the industries that are trying to enter the business like that the actual constitutional amendment really preventing some of the fracking companies and corporations from, quite frankly, turning, Pennsylvania into a trash can. Mm-hmm. So, it's something that has, been used in court to protect its citizens and they'll, hopefully get used in court again.
Now, I just had one more question, and Julie, we really appreciate your time this morning. Now, looking ahead, what happens next year? What should residents be watching for, and what would you like to see happen?
My hope is that we start to really get some answers, and we see that, this site is the focus and not the data center is the focus. Obviously, in our opinion, the data center should not be getting built on the site. It's something where it's clearly not safe. You have all of the data and evidence to show that, again, like the EPA says right now, you can go look at the website. It says they can't go ahead and determine if it's safe or protective of human health. So my hope is that we actually start to get some answers, that the data center gets put on hold, that we figure out why the site is getting worse and not better, right? So again, we're not this is not minor toxins, right? We have, pretty serious contaminants that, have impacted the site because of its history as a lithium mine. And so our hope is really to, have that, quite frankly, completely on pause indefinitely and start to address the problems with the site because we don't want to see the contamination of the groundwater extending. Right now the EPA says that they can't define it vertically or laterally. So that's their fancy little way of saying we don't know how bad it is. We need to find out how bad it is. So, my hope is really to start getting some answers and having a lot more accountability and responsibility for the false statements that were made, and really get the site to a better place.
Barry, you got anything else?
I could go on for hours, but we are going to run. We are running up. Me stay? We're running up on a time crunch. But I would like to thank you for coming out and doing the work that you do. I'm not somebody that's against data centers, but they can't be where they are, what they're trying to do right now. They need to be in a place where they don't affect humans. They need to be further out. They need to be away from areas, as far as I'm concerned. And an area where that is not a good place.
No, I mean,
not a good place.
It's not. And again, the Malvern Hunt, as you pointed out earlier, it's across the street. There's a child care facility across the street, church, farm school, parks, and now we're putting the elderly nearby with the Toll Brothers. It's did anyone look at a map here, folks?
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly? And so that's what I told, the East Whiteland board. I said, we're going to be the next Flint. And that's not something that you want to achieve here. So something needs to be done. People need to step up and start taking ownership. Otherwise, we're going to be on
lead in the water, PCBs.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's going to be a lot of sick people and sick children, and that's completely unacceptable.
Yep. I totally agree with you. Thank you for what you're doing. And will you come back on?
Oh, absolutely. Hopefully I can have a better update for you next time.
Love to have you back on with us. Thank you so much.
Of course. We appreciate you coming on. And as Barry mentioned, anytime you have any updates, we're more than happy to have you.
All right. Thanks so much.